Meg Beckman with her sidekick, unknown husband, Jim Beckman. What a blessing it is to have you two. We've known each other forever, but I don't feel like we've had a lot of time together, especially as a couple.
Oh, no, not at all.
We've
Oh,
been
not yeah, not at all.
we've been robbed.
Mm-hmm.
We've only gotten one of them. Feel like it's been very one-sided. Obviously, people know Jim Beckman. I mean, he's kind of a legend. He's so old. And
He's married to a younger wife, so
that's absolutely, it's obvious. But Jim, you've been doing this for a long time, this ministry thing. Obviously,
I do have the official title of the Yoda of Catholic Youth Ministry. So I just want
that
Does mean
looks like
he-
that looks like Yoda's drunk uncle. That doll right there.
once that tag started floating out there, I was like, have any of you looked at Yoda? Like, what? I'm not sure that I'm
more handsome than
happy
that.
about this
No, I
analogy.
think you still look good. We can actually talk about that idea in a little bit, but I mean, I don't know if I need to give too many of your credentials. Everybody probably knows
I think it'd be
of your
helpful,
ministry,
though.
but
Let's yeah.
spearheading and working in the Steubenville conferences forever. And obviously, the Augustine Institute, you were doing great work there. And of course, now with Impact, you are making a difference constantly. It's like you have this compulsion. Woe is you if you do not preach the gospel. And I think what we really want to know about too is Meg, because from what I understand, you're doing a lot in the mental health arena, which is what Linda's doing. And so we're going to just dive right in. So let's just start. Tell us a little bit about yourselves, and especially like when you met as a couple and how you ultimately decided, let's do this. Let's spend the rest of our lives being poor doing ministry.
Yeah.
Well, this is actually a famous story among close friends. The day that we met for the first time, I was recovering from a World Youth Day trip to Denver, Colorado.
Ironically.
This would have been back in '93, and I was I was like in a coma, like it was the end of that trip was just very, almost traumatic actually, with a number of things that happened, and trying to get the group of 800 people back to campus in Steubenville, like over that next week, I was sick. So one day I decided not to go to mass, but to go to confession, which was happening after mass. So I'm walking into the chapel as everybody's leaving noon mass, wearing a Young Life t-shirt. And Meg says, "Young Life? I know Young Life." So I was very distracted. I was on a beeline trying to go to confession, because I needed to confess murderous thoughts about other people that I worked with, And
JK.
and
That's K.
so anyway, we end up having this brief conversation, and she tells me she'd been very involved in Young Life, and I was like, well, I actually run a Young Life club here in Steubenville with several parishes, and I'm always looking for volunteers, and I'll reach out to you. Give me your name. I'll reach out to you. Like I'm going to remember the name, right? And so anyway, long story short, like weeks later, when the school year is getting ready to start, and I'm desperate for volunteers because I feel like I don't have any. I'm like, who was that girl that I met? Like I can't remember her name. And so I started, I did remember that her first name was Meg, but I couldn't remember the last name. And I went to Student Life, and then I went to the registrar's office, and so eventually I found out who she was, got a phone number, called her, and set up to meet with her in the J.C. Williams Center. And so I walk in. So this is probably what,
That was a good
6 weeks
while.
later, maybe
Mhm.
at least a month. But I walk into the J.C. Williams Center having no idea who I'm looking for. Like I didn't remember what she looked like. I didn't, I
I
and
knew what he looked like.
yeah.
It's like,
So
he's handsome.
that's what I was kind of banking on. Was like, well, hopefully she'll remember me, and when I walk in, somebody will stand up and start coming towards me. And so as I walk into the J.C. Williams Center, this woman gets up and starts coming towards me. And here's my thought, honest to God, like no exaggeration. That can't be her. There's no way I would forget that. Uh, I was just struck like, oh wow, like she's really attractive. I that can't be her. And of course it was. And so we sit down and I'm supposed to be doing an interview with her to see if she could be a volunteer with the youth ministry stuff. And probably about 20 minutes into the conversation, it shifted from questions about youth ministry to how many kids do you want to have? And what like I'm not really
I think the first question was, what are your hopes and dreams for your life, or something like that.
yeah, but
Then
I
she
mean,
got to
but the
kids,
questions did get kind of more intense and
Yeah.
more serious and
more
more
personal.
deep and personal. And
Mhm.
I went home. I was living with a family at the time, and I went home and said, I think I just met the woman I'm going to marry. Like
That's awesome.
it really was like one of those moments where I like we had a connection in that first conversation that I think I just knew.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'd probably say
Did you
I did
feel that
too.
too?
Yeah, definitely. But I had
So she's
to
like,
be
who the hell is that guy?
discerning. I had to discern and pray and all these things and make sure. So yeah.
I think that's probably one of the most Franciscan university questions ever. Like, how many kids do you want to have? I mean,
12.
Well,
Done.
back in the day, I did want to have like 12 kids, and
it's good
I
enough.
wasn't sure. I'm a little more
all
cautious.
boys and named after the 12 apostles. Like that's
Right,
where
of
I
course.
was going, right?
That's so funny,
I
actually.
tend to be a little more, cautious, discerning. Yeah, all those things. So, but anyway, yes, I did want a lot of children, but one baby at a time, right?
Right.
So you guys, obviously you had the initial encounter, you began your dating journey, and then when you had the big, proposal, was that a special, like, thought out event? Was that spontaneous, Mr. Beckman? What
Do
happened?
you know do you know what he did?
Were you actually there?
No,
I don't know if you were
Okay.
quite Catholic yet in 95 or
no,
96.
we
Yeah.
became Catholic 99.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean like the context, because it was a little bit of a last minute, unfortunately, last minute decision. Um, but the context of it was I lost my job. So I'm working for the University of Steubenville. They went through a bit of a financial crisis. They were having to eliminate positions. And I don't know why this happens in the church. Sorry, this is a side tangent, but why? Why? Every time there's money problems, the first thing we cut is youth ministry.
Right,
Mhm.
exactly.
Every diocese, every parish, like I don't know,
That's right.
like it's like, well, this is our lowest priority. So back in that time, like that decision was made. They kind of cut the whole uh, Christian outreach area, cut all the youth staff, and kind of came down to just one person. And so anyway, I was looking for a job, ended up finding something in Louisiana, and was moving at the end of the summer. And the family that I'm living with, like one morning, we're sitting out on the back porch, like having a cup of coffee, and the wife, her name's Ruth, we're a very, very dear friend, but she says, Jim Beckman, I'm sorry to be a woman here, but if you're really planning to do something with Meg, you need to do it before you move.
Because I might find
I-
somebody else.
I remember sitting there looking at her, and then all of a sudden having this like complete panic, like, oh my gosh, I need to get engaged. I gotta find a ring. I gotta propose. I gotta do all this stuff. And so I actually went and found a ring first, but then a few weeks later there was one of the big Steubenville youth conferences that summer, and Bob Rice, who's a close friend.
Well, that was his first summer
over
that
the
he
years.
was doing youth conferences, I think.
Oh no, second.
Oh, second.
Yeah, he had been so anyway, Bob
One, two.
Bob was Bob
It's
Rice and
definitely
Pete
second.
Walker were doing the characters that summer that we did for a period of years. And so anyway, we orchestrated this whole skit on the closing Sunday morning of the conference where I would come up and kind of intercept them in the middle of a thing, and then they would bring up Meg on stage, and then we would just like drop the skit and go into I'm going to propose to her in front of the
Hilarious.
3,000 people sitting in the crowd.
Jesus.
It was epic. It was awesome. Like actually over the next 3 years, I proposed to Meg. The next summer, we came back and I introduced my new wife,
Oh,
to standing ovation from the youth, uh, the youth conference crowd. And then the next summer we had Aaron was born, our first kid. And we did another skit with the characters, and Father Dave Pavanka came in from the back of the tent carrying Aaron in his arm,
oh,
Rafiki from The Lion King, to the Lion King theme song, and then hold him up on stage. Like the progression of those 3 years was just so amazing. Like by the time we were holding up Aaron, literally the whole crowd, like many of the people had been there for multiple years,
every
so they had
conference, or at least two of the
they had
three.
seen
Mhm.
the
yeah.
progression. Like people were standing up on their chairs and like just shrieking, cheering. It was amazing.
That is
Uh,
awesome.
One of the best cheer
It
And
was
moments.
that's
fun.
been anticlimactic ever since. Nothing can,
But
no
what could it
standing
live up to those
ovations every
3
time you
summers?
introduce a baby.
It was done that year.
Yeah.
Year 3 was over. No, just joking. And we
So-
promise you, we didn't plan it. It just sort of happened organically. So
When you proposed that interim, you went to Louisiana. Meg, did you also go to Louisiana?
no, I finished my last year of my master's in counseling program. So, but Jim was back every month, or if I was flying home to Memphis, which I think I might have only flown home once at Christmas. He came at Christmas to Memphis, did more wedding planning. And then I got home in June. You might have come home one time because we got married July 1st. I think or actually got home like mid-May. I think you came up once, again, finished last details of the wedding planning, and we got married, and I moved to Louisiana with him. And
I don't know if I would completely recommend a long distance,
I
courtship.
courtship all the way up
Yes.
to the date of the wedding. Like that was
Right.
it was a little straining, I think, on both of us.
But made us communicate, made us talk. Those were the days where you, talked on the phone.
It's
Didn't
very
have
good for
Zoom.
chastity. I will say that.
Of course.
That. The Lord knew what he was doing.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you bring up chastity because we do a lot of work with pre-Cana couples, and many of them are already living together and have children, and for all intents and purposes are kind of living a married life. But
Mhm.
why? I mean, obviously you felt that it was important to, have a chaste relationship before getting married. Why is that important? Do you think it's still important? Is it even relevant?
Oh, absolutely.
Always relevant.
I had been a part of something back in that time. I think it was part of our marriage prep, but I had learned about some study, um, and it was just, one of those data points, where if you do these 5 things, uh, the percentages of you staying together as a married couple, like so dramatically increased. Like it got up into like the high 80, early 90% percentile. And one of those things was don't cohabitate and don't sleep together. Remain chaste up until the time of your wedding. Pray together, communicate, have regular communication with each other, go to church together, and make that just a fundamental commitment. So the study listed off these 5 things, and it was just showing, they'd studied thousands of other couples, and the couples that did these 5 things, more than 90% of them actually stayed together.
Mm.
So as a very young, person engaged, I was like, okay, those are pretty good odds, like I'm that it actually all makes sense. And so I think we are kind of fundamentally committed to that from the very beginning.
Well, what's interesting about that is that I feel like that was just kind of a basic part of catechesis from adults to young people back then. But I'm not sure who's speaking that to the younger generation at all at this point in the game. And even for us in our kind of pre-Cana retreat day that we give, we might make a mention of it right before they go into reconciliation. I think for some of them, that's the first time they've heard that.
Mm.
But statistically, one of the big statistics for longevity in marriage is not using birth control, which is again another
Yeah, that was
shocking.
I think that was the 5th one.
That might have
Yeah.
been the 5th thing. Yeah. What, like 90, is it 98%?
Yeah, it's insane. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish we had a copy of that study. That's our current version of that study.
Yeah.
Because I do think
Mhm.
that today's young couples would be interested in statistics. They like
I have a hard copy of the study in my file cabinet.
Oh,
I don't
well,
know if
and
I
take
don't
a
know if it's
picture
ever
and
been
see.
redone, but
Mhm.
because
I'll take it.
I used to teach, pre-Cana classes and marriage prep stuff here in Denver and then also in Oklahoma City. And I would always pull out that study and show these five things. And so I would always try to make a compelling case.
We'll send it to you.
Please.
That's good.
So obviously you're married and you already have a little kid on the around the table with you. You're doing the Holy Family thing, the three of you. So how many kids do you have? And was it like regular, every couple of years you had a kid? Did you struggle with pregnancy, that kind of stuff? What was it like for you guys with the pro-life part of
Well,
it?
I wanted to have 12 kids, but we ended up having 24. So it's been a little bit burdensome.
The Lord's been with us. It's all been okay. No, yeah, no, we did not struggle with infertility, and nor have I had any miscarriages, but obviously lots of friends that have struggled with those types of things. And being a counselor, I'm a little empathetic, so I get all that. But on the other hand, when you get pregnant easily, there are somewhat, could be crosses with that as much of a gift as it is. If there's financial constraints and maybe emotional issues, it can be a little bit burdensome for a time. But yeah, no, we had a baby right out the gate. We were married 3
I need to
months.
clarify. We only had 5 kids.
Oh,
So
well, yeah.
we didn't have 24. That was a joke.
Back to reality. 5 children. Yeah. So we had a child about every 2 years. One was like a little less than 2, and another baby was a little over 2. For the first 4 kids, and then I did need a little break. I was struggling emotionally with some brokenness, nothing like not major depression, but probably some low-grade depression, and a little anxiety, and just felt like a bad mom. And I felt very far away from the Lord. Ultimately, it was spiritual desolation coming out of woundedness. And I struggled that way for about 7 years. And so that's why after baby number 4, after a time, I just told Jim, I said, can we really be conservative with natural family planning? I really want some healing. I'm hopeful. I know the healing's out there. I know the Lord wants that for me. Just got to find somebody that can help me, that it makes sense what they're saying. Because I obviously had been talked about a lot, and obviously I have my master's in counseling, but I just needed somebody to kind of guide me to that. And eventually, it took a while. It took 7 years. At the time, there weren't a lot of strong Catholic counselors in Denver or really anywhere. Now it seems like they're almost a dime a dozen, which is beautiful, which is very much needed. But there just really weren't a lot of people that I trusted. But then we met this priest. Well, he moved to Denver to work at the seminary, and Jim started working with him first. And I just started seeing changes in Jim, and he started coming home sharing some of these really spiritual principles, but obviously, they made sense to me. And I said to him, I was a little nervous to ask Father, would you meet with me too? So I asked Jim to ask him, which is like, I guess Father gets a lot. He's like, a lot of people do this. They ask their spouses to ask me. And of course he said yes. And he just started working with me. And definitely within a year, started experiencing some really beautiful consolation, which was healing. And in less than a year, I said, I'm ready for another baby. And so became pregnant with number 5, Brian, who really, has really been in so many ways such an easy kiddo to raise, and which I just think this was the Lord's gift to constantly remind me how much he loves me and how much the healing work that he did in my life around that time. And do I experience spiritual desolation still? And do I still have woundedness? Yeah, definitely. But I'm hopeful, and I know consolation will return. So that's kind of the story around having our children and where I was at during all that.
I appreciate that. I think that a lot of people struggle with postpartum depression and the feeling of anxiety. And there's a lot of really aggressive people who you want to minimize the importance of NFP. They almost kind of insist that somehow it's just the equivalent of Catholic birth control and you shouldn't ever do it. But I really appreciate you speaking to that because there's so many, real struggles in couples' relationships with one child after the other. We struggle with that.
Right. I do think you're right that we need to be sensitive to those who are struggling with infertility. It's so rampant these days. But there is a burden to having a lot of children, and people maybe think, well, you know how to prevent that, just stop, right? But when you get pregnant really easily, it's not as easy. And with a schedule like with us, Chris's schedule, it's just made it really difficult to postpone and delay pregnancies. And so, but with lots of children,
still be married, with the travel schedule, you love your spouse, and so
right. And so I don't know, I just think that that it is important to acknowledge that infertility is difficult, not having children is difficult, but having children, even just having one child, is difficult, right? I've always said one child will throw you on your butt, and that's enough. That's so much that changed. That was the hardest for me. But with each one of my pregnancies, I dealt with postpartum depression, and but it just the Lord is good. He's so gracious to give us what we need, and the church offers NFP for these situations.
Yeah.
So,
Jim, I actually have a vivid memory of you. This is your saying, and I'm sure I'm going to give you a chance to take it back if you want now. But you said NFP stood for no fun for Papa.
I don't. You must be thinking of Bob Rice. I don't think I've ever seen.
Maybe I am.
That sounds like Jim, but that is funny.
Well, this idea of, we're traveling, we come home, our wives, are fertile. It's either no or have another kid. I'm like, we can have another kid. That doesn't bother me at all, right? And she's like, yeah, well, for 9 months, you're not really inconvenienced, are you? So the funny thing is that it provokes a conversation. I mean, you have to recognize that maybe this isn't the right time. That's hard. We always want to idealize NFP, especially in certain conservative circles, like how wonderful NFP is. But sometimes it doesn't seem very wonderful at all. It is brutal, and sometimes it's really difficult to embrace that with such a loving heart.
It's not rose-colored glasses, right? It's not so
and it's why prayer is so important. I would say Jim has always been good at his daily personal prayer, but I would say when I was in that time of desolation, I really struggled to pray because it's like, why pray? I'm not gonna really hear the Lord. And not like, I knew that you didn't need to hear him all the time. I still believed, and I still believe that the Lord loved me, and I believe that the Catholic faith was the fullness of all truth and all those things, because thankfully I've been formed intellectually that way. It just was my heart was struggling to, come together and know and tangibly know of God's love. So we struggled, I struggled praying personally, and then even together, but once we started working with Father Scott and got on the other side, yes, personal daily prayer is so important for couples individually. So you can pray through those ups and downs, through those consolation, desolation times of our lives. It's going to happen. It's ebb and flow. It's just how life is. And if you're not praying and discerning, really understanding discernment, you can drive each other crazy. Your wounds can really come at each other. And then you probably tend to take it out on one another. And so we're so thankful for the gift of prayer and God's grace and his mercy and his love in our life, and for having that, and for God putting Father Scott in our life to propel us that. And I would say couple prayer took a little while to kind of catch up, because I think we both had an idea in our mind of what that looked like, like pray, where it's now become more of a conversation. Like, I think, it should be at least to some degree, because that's how we relate to God. sharing what God's doing in our life. And then at the end, we usually say, okay, what do you need? What do you really, we've talked about these things. What's what God's doing? What's the thing you need prayer for today? And then we'll say those things, and we just say a little, either quick, spontaneous, or sometimes like, let's just say, glory be, I got to go. I got to run and get ready and get out the door. So.
I love
That's
that.
good. Yeah, I wanted to ask about that, what couple prayer looks like, because I know that even people who've been married for a long time, that individual prayer, they can nail that down pretty well. But it's a different step to pray together as a couple. It's a lot more. There's just so humbling, I think, and it can be embarrassing for people. So we like talking to couples about what does that look like for you to pray together. And so I love that you made it a conversation. Like, so you two you share together what's the Lord's doing in your life, and then pray at the end. That's unique.
Yeah,
I mean, we do a lot of talking about what the Lord's doing in our life, but I never thought of it as prayer, or even ending in prayer, and that's a great way to look at that.
Yeah, that's good. So you guys have been married how long now?
This summer will be 29, so 28 years.
Yep.
Yeah, this summer will be 29. So 28 and a half, 28 and 3/4.
It's funny. We literally have been telling people this whole last year that we were married 33 years. It turns out it wasn't true. It was actually 32 years. We're at the age in our life where we're getting all of the dates wrong.
It's okay. Jim accuses me of this. I always say that he's older, like a year older. He's like, quit making me a year older. He keeps saying I'm whatever the age is. 55, I'm 54. He's actually older than that. But anyway, you know what I mean.
We all know. Yeah.
I'm the worst.
Notice that she's not going to say it now because she's not sure exactly.
1965. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, here's the big question I want to ask you guys, which I think will be helpful. I mean, the audience is going to be varied. Obviously, this is the imagined audience. We have no idea who's watching, but people getting married, people who are married, people who were married, widowed, that kind of thing. So knowing what you know now, after almost 3 decades of being together and married, what advice would you give young Jim and Meg getting ready to get married? What are some of the tried and true, this is really important?
Yeah. Well, I think the topic of prayer, which we've already kind of delved into, I just think that is paramount. Meg and I do a couples retreat. I don't know, we've done four or five of them, but the whole retreat is all like the incremental progression on the retreat is you got to be praying yourself. But then that relationship has to somehow be brought into your marriage.
Right.
Like your relationship together. And I don't know if that would work for everybody the way we do it. We tried for years to pray together, and we're just so different. I'm a complete introvert. Meg's a complete extrovert. And us trying to sit down and pray together is just odd. It's awkward because I pray very, very differently than she prays. And we struggled for years, like trying to make that happen in kind of forced ways. And I think we came to this place of recognizing that
this feels forceful. This feels awkward.
Well, but just recognizing that, okay, at the heart of prayer is being in a relationship with God.
Being in a conversation.
How can we share that individual relationship with the Lord with each other in a way that would be fruitful to our relationship together? And that I don't know, I feel like we've hit a sweet spot, for a number of years now, where our prayer is really more almost like opening up the window a little bit, or the door into that relationship that we have individually, and sharing kind of the intimate workings and movements of that relationship, but with each other. And it almost always lands with, well, how can I pray for that for you? And then we are praying together, and I'm praying for what she's shared with me, and
but
she's
it's still
praying,
a conversation.
Praying, so I don't know, like that's been kind of a beautiful experience for us. And I would be a big believer that those who pray together stay together. I think like in a marriage, and particularly when you start having kids, and when they're young and toddlers and stuff, they're very time consuming and incredibly all consuming.
Mhm.
But and you kind of wish, oh, I wish they would get older, so I wouldn't have to be so worried about them killing themselves or falling off a ledge or something, right? But actually, as they get older, you don't have control over anything,
You still have that fear.
right? So I mean, the whole burden shifts,
Mhm.
where now all of a sudden all you can do is pray. You
Mhm.
can't control their choices. You can't control the things that they do. You can't
Yeah.
control sometimes even the friends that they associate
Or
with.
what they believe.
Yeah, and what
Mhm.
so like there's a lot you can do to influence those things, obviously, but at a certain point, prayer and praying for our kids, that's I think that's been another thing that's been really beautiful and fruitful in our relationship together, is just focusing on our kids.
Hmm.
What about you, Meg? What do you think if you were to look back and say, here's some advice I'd give to that young couple getting married?
I know there's so many things, but I guess the thing that keeps when you ask that the first time and now the second time that you're asking what's coming up for me is that even if you love the Lord and even if you're very prayerful and very faithful and obviously, all the Catholic things that you might be doing, that your woundedness will come up and you will clash with one another. Your woundedness will clash. There's a funny saying like every couple argues and it's usually the same argument over and over.
Mhm.
I believe that's your wound. You have this primary wound. Linda, Chris has this primary wound, and it's just, keeps coming at each other. But to not think you're failures because that happens, it's just going to happen.
Right.
It's the way to holiness. It's the way to heaven. And how are you going to get through that? How are you going to get healing so that that doesn't divide you? It actually brings you together. So, yeah, I just think I thought, oh, we love Jesus, everything's just going to be fine. Everything's going to be okay. And it got to the point where it wasn't, not that we never talked about divorce. It just was a lot of tension.
Mhm.
And I probably would say, at least for me, not feeling very happy and even doubting my vocation. So, I would just say it's going to probably happen. And what are you going to do? Get a plan. Are you going to go to counseling? Are you going to seek maybe like a Bob Schuchts Healing the Whole Person conference, or just another marriage conference and don't give up. Don't give up. God has you together for a reason, and He is with you whether you feel Him or not. So just, fight for your marriage, fight for your vocation, fight for your holiness and your going to heaven, getting each other to heaven. So,
I love that. That's such a great point. That was something I wanted to talk about, was that idea of the interplay of mental health and marriage. That it is a reality that it's gonna, like you said, it's gonna come up. Everybody has issues.
mhm.
When we talk to pre-married couples, it's the idea that we relate it to a baggage. You come into this relationship, and especially now with people getting older, married later, right? Their bags are full of a lot more junk, and there is oftentimes mental health issues, addiction. We see addiction ravaging through marriages left and right, and
Yeah.
but so yeah, like not being recognizing. So you say, first of all, recognize that this is a reality, and that not to ignore it, not to think that just your love for Jesus is going to get you through, that this is a real thing that needs to be worked on, and with professional help or in some
Mhm.
way, right? And of course, communicating between the two of you. Like, how did that play out for you guys to uh, communicate these things? Uh,
In some of your like counseling stuff, are you familiar with IFS, in
I
internal
am.
family
Yeah.
systems? Yeah.
Hmm.
Like this has been, I feel kind of revolutionary in our relationship, because I feel like we've done a fairly good job over the years of recognizing that woundedness and brokenness, but it has just still continued to, in particularly in tension moments or in times of conflict, it just has, continued to kind of be a hard element to overcome. What the IFS approach has done for us, though, is like, and I don't know how familiar listeners would be with this. So, like, just a brief, the whole internal family system
Approach.
premise
Mhm.
is, as a human person, we're a multiplicity of parts. And we have parts over time that emerge in us that take on roles that they were never meant to take on.
As a way to survive, kind of.
And many times those parts get locked in at whatever age they start taking on that role. So like all of a sudden, some of these, conflicts that have gone on for years between us, when you can suddenly say, okay, I'm not mad at you. There's a part of me that's mad right now. I don't even know what part that is, but I need to spend some time thinking about what that part is and what that part needs right now.
Mm-hmm.
And Meg is saying that actually really helps me to know that it's not all of you that's mad,
Mm-hmm.
that's just a part of you. And actually, there's a part of me that's reacting to that part of you.
Mm-hmm.
So now all of a sudden, the two of us can be together and looking at these parts and trying to talk about, well, what's going on with this part and what's going on with this part and
Mm-hmm.
what is that part needing right now? Like, why is it feeling so triggered in a way that's causing this reaction and causing all of this anger or causing
Hurt.
all of this fear?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I would just be very transparent. Like, I have a ton of brokenness from my past.
Trauma.
Yeah, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
very, very traumatic things in my
Mm-hmm.
childhood, and uh, including some abuse things that I don't know. I mean, I just have some around relationships, trust issues, and just fundamental fear of betrayal,
Mm-hmm.
that make me, like hyper vigilant
Yeah.
around any displeasure, right? So if I sense somehow from Meg that she is not happy with something that I've done or that she's upset with me, it's not like in a with somebody that doesn't have that kind of background could maybe brush that off. I can't.
Mm-hmm.
Like I literally will just be so hyper vigilant with facial expressions and tone of voice and if I get any more validation about what I think is happening, then I have a catastrophizing part that like like I'm divorced and living in a different state before we even finish the argument,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. That's real.
So anyway, it
Yeah.
just like this has been so
Mm.
helpful for us.
And it only came into our life a couple years ago. I would say before that, I feel like both of us got to a point though where you understood that my facial expressions or my frustration with you or our life, something in our life, I wasn't going to leave. So I think Jim came to the point that he knew I'm here to stay. He trusted me. And but I also used to, when Jim would do things and I would get hurt, I would think, you just don't love me. He's like, no, this is just a part of me that's frustrated.
Mm.
And that really helped me to know, like, if he was upset by something I did, he wasn't gonna, not leave me. I knew Jim wouldn't leave me, but that he wouldn't love me. Women want to be loved, men want to be respected, that whole thing.
Well, and it's funny, like one of the mysterious comments that would be made over the years, Meg would say, kind of in exasperation, like in a heated argument or something, like, sometimes I feel like I'm arguing with a child.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until IFS and just learning more about all this stuff and really understanding my brokenness, and I'm like, I can finally say, like, actually, you have been arguing with a child, and he's only 8 years old.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
That's
so
really
that's been very
insightful, actually. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
I know I learning about some of these things, and doing my own work on these as I'm learning, I'm hoping to help other people with them. I realize I need to do my own work on this, but to realize that what I recognize all along is maybe this is a strength of mine is actually a wound. It's coming out of a wound. And that was really hard for me to recognize, to accept, really. But what
Yeah.
I've seen is that even before me understanding any of this, I can look back and see that the Lord has been present to me all my life, doing healing work, right? That even though, IFS came in at a certain point and really made sense of everything. But all along, you can look back and see that Lord was already doing some healing there, that Jim already could recognize that he could trust you, even though he didn't have the real serious work done at that point. I just think that faithfulness
That's right.
of the Lord to be present all along, even in that desolation time, or that you didn't feel it, right? Just that you don't feel that the Lord is present, but he was always present, but you just didn't
Yes.
feel it. And yet his faithfulness there to even bring you out of that desolation and to reveal himself to you. His faithfulness is so great. And
Amen. And I think for both of us being married 30 years, give or take, you can now look back and say, oh, because we kept praying, we kept seeking the Lord, we kept responding to his grace in our life, even if it was hard, even if it was difficult, I can now look back and see the fruits. And so that's definitely what I would, the second part of encouraging young couples is like, don't give up. You will get to the point where you're able to look back and say, wow, God did this and he did this and he was here and he was there. And he loves us. He's faithful. He is just going to continue being that way. And that gives you hope for your marriage, for yourself, for your spouse, for your family.
right.
One of the things that I think well, first of all, things are different now, obviously, compared to when we were younger. When we were younger, the whole idea of going to therapy, some sort of psychological evaluation was very much connected to that. And the idea of, especially in our Protestant upbringing, that we would go to some sort of a secular therapist, that this was almost adverse to our whole Christian experience, So it was really kind of let Jesus just heal you, and that's enough. Well, when one of the things that I've really appreciated over the last, I don't know, 5-10 years is just the openness now that people have to the possibility and the need for therapy. And what I think Linda and I especially can resonate with you, because you two are in a lot of ways like us. We were all in on our faith. While it was a Protestant upbringing, yours was a Catholic. We were all in. We knew Christ wanted that intimate personal relationship with it. We knew that God was bringing us together. We knew that we had the possibility to change the world with him in our lives and our marriages. We prayed together. We read the scriptures. We just dove into evangelization. But that didn't mean that we didn't have problems. And I think there's this weird delusion that says, if you let God into your life, then you're set now. You're not going to have the issues. You're not going to have the problems. And I'm so grateful for your vulnerability, because you're going to be caught like completely unaware if you're not feed into the fact that the longer you're with one another, there's nowhere to hide. The reality of you comes out, and that you has a lot of wounds and trauma and brokenness, and that can brush up against your preconceived ideas of what your marriage is supposed to look like and be like. A lot of people give up because it's too radical of a difference between what they think it's going to be. So just really,
I think like you're kind of speaking into something that I think is, I don't know how to articulate this, and I don't want to offend anybody. So I'm just cautious that sometimes you can say something that just becomes like a lightning rod. So I'm giving the disclaimer ahead of time. Like I don't mean this in any way. I'm trying to be very careful how I articulate this. But I think one of the poverties right now with younger couples is many of them are being influenced by these very, very traditional approaches to the Catholic faith. And you could kind of go down the stream of like ultra conservative to TLM groups to like any of those kinds of things. And I have a ton of respect for people that are drawn to that kind of spirituality and have that kind of like that they're enriched by that. But I think that the challenge sometimes is that kind of spirituality oftentimes is very devoid of real relationship. And I've had many, many people who are kind of in those circles who have been very critical of me and the way that I do ministry and the way that I approach ministry, saying that it's too emotional and it's too actually driven by the heart and not by the intellect. And like I just fundamentally disagree with some of those things. I think it's both, right? God made us as human beings, and as human beings, we have a heart, we have emotions, we have authentic need for connection and intimacy and relationship. And my fear is there's a lot of people that are being so influenced by these the like very, very traditional focus in faith, where it's almost like a spiritual bypass, right? Like
Mm,
I'm going to actually ignore some of the human needs that I
mm,
have because
right.
those are bad. Those could lead me to sin, or those could lead me to trouble. So it's almost like I'm kind of going to have this stoic approach to my life where I cut myself off from all of those kinds of needs, and I just be more religious, and I just be more spiritual, and I just be more rigid
Mhm.
about the way that I approach the faith. And unfortunately, people who live a stoic reality or a stoic experience of the faith, they actually start to become such harsh advocates of it that they spend all of their time just telling everybody else what they're doing wrong.
Right.
There's a whole lot of that going on right now,
Yes, there
right?
is. We're very divided.
Yeah, when at the end of the day, it's faith and reason. You do have to form your intellect. That is very important, but you also have to form your humanity. And then faith and reason, it has to come together. We have to be integrated, both, heart, mind, and soul. And so it's not, one or the other. It's both and this will bring you freedom, and this will bring you true joy in yourself and in life and in your marriage.
Right. I love that point though, like that the by squishing down the humanity though, I can
Mhm.
be more spiritual. But
Mm.
really, it is in the I think it wasn't it Rich Mullins who said the greatest compliment you can give God is to be fully human.
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
no, that yeah, that so we want to smush the humanity down so we can be so saintly and spiritual, but it's in the fulfillment of our humanity. God made us human with
Well,
all these aspects, and being fully human is to honor him with the creation that he's given.
I mean, you're stepping towards Gnosticism if you keep embracing that idea that somehow the spiritual, that almost here's the secret insight on how to live your life, and it's really more of a spiritual kind of pursuit. And you rob that humanity of its gift. That's kind of leaning more towards the Gnostic presentation. I love that our sacraments are constantly reminding us about that tangible, about the matter that it does. The matter matters, you know. But I think partly, again, for me, I always kind of put this stuff in the idealized. This is our preconceived idea of what we think it's supposed to be like. If I do these things, then if we do A and B, then we have C, the perfect marriage. A and B, C, the perfect kids. But that's not what happens. A and B equals, is I joke, WTF. I mean, like sometimes the letters and the numbers
Or
don't
or or
work.
cluster, right?
Let me kind of take us into just a teeny bit of it. Well, first of all, I have just a personal question. Meg, are you doing kind of therapy work, mental health counseling right now? If I remember, that's probably what's happening.
Yes. So I got my master's in 1995 from Franciscan. Before it was accredited, although they were on the accreditation track, and then they eventually did a couple years later. So, but because we had the baby, a baby out the gate, and every 2 years after that, I just did not pursue the counseling. Again, it kind of everything, I was just overwhelmed by a lot of things at the time. But now I am on, so I'm an LPCC, which means I'm a candidate to become a licensed practicing counselor, licensed professional counselor, excuse me. So what I had to do is I had to, go through this process of getting all of my stuff from Franciscan approved, all my course, which they were, because the courses that Franciscan had chosen were already part of like what the accreditation agency had wanted. So that happened pretty quickly. And then I paid for my test, and I take my test at the end of July. So, and then I just have to finish one more year of getting my hours. But what I am actually doing, I'm actually working in schools as a Catholic school counselor. And so I work with kids in an elementary school, ages K-8. It's more short-term, brief counseling, 6 to 8 sessions. But I can also do groups, and I can also do what we call SEL, social emotional learning lessons, on a variety of topics like bullying or communication or, executive functioning skills. So all of that. And I just love it. It is very kind of a little more on the behavioral side. But I love it. But at some point, I hope to go more towards the therapy side, Catholic therapy. We have a clinic. So I work for a Catholic clinic here in Denver. That's part of Catholic Charities. And we have a clinic arm and a school arm. And I'm part of the school arm. But I do love schools. If you think about it, kids that are struggling with whatever they're struggling with has to present itself at school. So maybe their parents are getting divorced. That's a home issue. But if they're coming to school, and they're upset, then I can teach them, work with them on some of the, emotional regulation or cognitive behavioral therapy kind of things. But, if you think about it, kids that are struggling, they're in school all day long, 9 months a year, 5 days a week. And I just love being able to be there and being a support for them to help them like school and love life no matter what's going on. So,
one of the things that I think is obviously evident, but you both have such a heart for ministry. And I love that you allow each other to explore what that ministry looks like. And it's different and yet complementary, because obviously Jim, as he's dived into, right, just unpacking some of the trauma and the stuff in his life, he's really seen the beauty of therapy and how it can be set right into a Catholic, experience, that is not adverse from one to the other. And this is something we talk about a lot, that there's something really helpful for a couple when they each pursue what it is that they're passionate about. And what I love is that not only do you both do that, but it kind of shows up in how you're interacting with each other. And there's a complementarity to it. Jim's growing as you're growing as he's growing. It's a real vulnerable honesty that I think is such a powerful witness. So I'm
Thank
pretty
you.
impressed. All right, I just have simple questions now. These are almost like fast.
Rapid fire.
Who's better with money, Jim or Meg?
We're both bad.
We're in good company, honey.
But good in different ways that is complementary. So we've managed over the years.
You're both good and bad. Okay. Way to avoid the question. All right, here's the next one. Who is the initiator when it comes to saying I'm sorry first?
Jim.
Me, yeah.
That's what I figured. All right. I'm the
Because
same way.
I've embraced the reality that I'm just a failure most of the time.
You and I are
I just start there.
we're twins, basically.
The same mom.
Linda,
Yeah.
what was that
You're
book though
cold.
that you were looking at where it kind of talked about that idea of these it was the book that you were reading in the car as we were driving home, and it was kind of this therapy principle that talked about why I am.
Oh, it was IFS.
That was?
It was?
No, it was
No.
attachment. It was attachment theory.
Yeah, that attachment
Oh,
theory
yeah.
stuff. That's
Attachment.
that's
Mhm.
kind of a little bit revealing for both of us. We'll
Right.
say that.
Oh yeah, I've got a lot of attachment stuff.
Yeah.
All right, who do the kids go to when they have a problem?
Meg.
Meg?
Yeah, it is me, but you think Jim, the youth minister, but I'm a counselor. But there's a few things that they'll go to if they're frustrated with Jim. I mean, with me, they'll of course, vent to Jim.
I would say it's a little bit of both.
It is. I'm just around. Well, I was around more up until this year. I was the one mostly at home. We would do youth ministry, or we would do ministry things together. But I was mostly at home in Oklahoma City. I worked from home most 3 days a week and 1 day in the office. Now I'm driving an hour to work and an hour from work 4 days a week. So Jim is mostly home unless he's traveling. But now we're just down to one kid. So I just think it more was proximity. I was home more, and I do think the kids. We approach life very relational. That doesn't mean we have rules or we have expectations in our home, but Jim and I are both just very relational. And I just think the kids know they can come and talk to us almost about anything. There's almost nothing we don't know about our kids. And they even have been pretty good about not hiding things because they always get caught. And because we say Daddy and I just pray that, if you do something wrong, the Holy Spirit's just gonna
it's
let you
one
get
of
in trouble.
It's one of the jokes with the kids that they say, we can't get by with anything. Like you always catch us. I was like, well,
trying.
Mom and I pray
We
that
just pray.
that you would never get by with hiding something.
That's awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. So
Are,
yeah,
are you both morning or evening people, or is that different?
for a
Well,
long.
Meg falls asleep about 8:30 pretty much every night now.
This is a new reality. This is a new thing. But for years I was a night person, but then I would had a really hard time getting up in the morning with the baby. So Jim was always so good about, I mean, we nursed, we practically didn't do any bottles past Aaron because I worked with Aaron. So I had to do bottles with him, the first child. But Jim would get up and bring the baby to me, and I'd nurse the baby in bed and fall back to sleep and those kinds of things. But yeah, now we are both, yeah, I'm falling asleep at 8:30, but I'm up at 5:30. We're both up at 5:30 praying. And I used to not pray in the morning, by the way. When I was home for 12 years, I would pray in the middle of the day, and I would just tell the kids, Mommy's praying, go. This was when I started praying after the big desolation, the 7 years of desolation. I would tell the kids, Mommy's praying. You can come over and lay by me. You can color, you can play with toys. But right now I'm talking to Jesus. So I need 30 minutes, about 30 minutes. And they were pretty good about doing that, the ones that were home at the time. So now, yeah, we're both, like I said, I'm falling asleep at 8:30, but we're both up at 5:30. So
I mean, honestly, yeah, I'm a pretty late night owl, but and Linda's not.
Yeah, it was
so.
juggling being wanting to hang out with my late night owl husband, but knowing I have to get up in the morning with babies or
yeah.
it's
Mhm.
I feel like I haven't slept my whole life. So yeah.
So, and this is kind of an odd question, but you guys have been doing ministry for decades, and have you ever thought, we gotta get a real job? Like this is ridiculous.
Mm-mm. No, that's just not.
And I love that answer because I remember telling a friend of mine, especially when the pandemic was going on, I said, the thing about this, I just don't feel like God asked me to stop doing ministry.
Mm.
I can't change the call because it's inconvenient now, you know? That means
Yeah.
a lot of kind of difficult months.
But also they're on the same page. And that's where we've seen this a lot
That's
in
right.
ministry too, where one is off doing the ministry, the other one is resentful about that, doesn't want to be a part of that. That's what you do. I do this. But we've
Yeah.
always been whatever, even though you're the one traveling, it was our ministry. We were on the same page with that. So important. That's a whole other conversation that
That's a whole nother, let's do another little show
Yeah.
about that, about ministry and having boundaries. Well, being on the same page, how to discern, being respectful, and then boundaries in ministry. Yeah, Jim
Yeah.
traveled, but he was always made sure he was home most of the time. And when he was home, he's helping with laundry, he's helping with dishes. I mean, babies. So
Gosh, I'm falling in love with Jim right now. Who's quicker to get angry?
Not everyone is called to that. I think it's partial.
right,
Yeah.
that's right.
Who's quicker to get angry between you two?
Me.
That's
I have an angry part, so it's not all of
Yeah,
me.
your little
It's
exile is
part of
angry.
me.
Yeah.
that part is becoming more and more healed and integrated.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. Yeah, I love those kind of little, I don't know, quick questions because, there's a part of us that it's easy for people to look at Jim as he gets on the stage. There's a guy, he's got it all together. He's somehow beyond what we're feeling and experiencing. But the reality, I often say that God calls the most broken and dysfunctional people to do ministry because we are keenly aware that we would be in prison if it weren't for Jesus in our life. Like we need him, like desperately need him to function. And I feel like in a lot of ways that's been obviously evidenced in people like you and myself. Jim, the other thing, and this was just a small aside, but I've kind of been with you when you've had some really painful moments from ministry avenues that you were collaborating with and the way that they've treated you. You mentioned it earlier too, even the idea of one of the first things to go in diocesan restructuring is the youth program. And a lot of times there's such a wound from pouring your heart into ministry and then feeling like it's not valid, because you're dismissed. And I was thinking about that because Linda is like a bulldog. I mean, she is infuriated sometimes with that kind of behavior by people that should be far more exemplary in the way that they treat their staff and even the way that they let people go. How have you guys managed through some of those moments? Because I feel like there's been a number, and yet you guys are still doing ministry and still want to do ministry, and yet you've been hurt so often by ministries. And we can talk about this in a future
Yeah, that
episode,
would be a great future
but
episode.
maybe there's something you could say to that, because I know couples struggle with this, and there's a lot of couples who give up entirely on ministry because of those wounds.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually happened 4 times over the years for me ministry career where I've been let go. And what's so bizarre to me, I still don't get this side of it, but in all 4 of those situations, there's been another person, typically somebody that I hired, that is in the mix in a way that I feel betrayed by that person, and then they end up taking my position. And so like it's a kind of a double whammy, with some of my woundedness and brokenness in the past. Um, but I mean, the simple answer, and this is going to sound like an example of spiritual bypass, but it isn't. I mean this very genuinely. I don't believe God ever calls us to ministry because he needs us.
Right.
I think he calls us to ministry for how he wants to love us and how he wants to kind of work out our own holiness. So many times, and none of us ever look at it like that, right? Like you get pursued for a job or some role in ministry, and I don't know, like everything in you humanly is attracted to that because, oh, God needs me, and I have gifts to share, and I'm going to be able to help these people and lead them to Jesus,
Save
and
souls, which that's
you know,
part of it. That's
which God does all of that.
Mhm.
And he does it because he loves having us collaborate and cooperate with him as he's doing what he does.
Mm.
But far more important to God, I think, is he desires to be in deeper intimacy with us. He desires to get into kind of all of the cracks and crevices in our hearts where there's brokenness and woundedness. Thomas Aquinas has this great line where he talks about the human heart being like a folded paper. He called it, like the word he uses is complicata, paper folded over and over, uh, which is like the English interpretation of that would be complicated, um, but what he says is God's love wants to get into all of the folds where there's shadows and where there's things that can't be seen, and he wants to unfold the paper. And I don't know, like every hard thing that I've gone through has actually stirred up some of those folds and some of those dark areas and some of those hidden things. Sometimes I even hide it from myself. So I don't know, like as painful as all of those things have been to go through, every single one of them has unfolded things in my heart that I had decided I didn't want to face anymore. I didn't want to look at anymore. And I wanted to kind of pretend weren't there. And it's almost like God was like, no, 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 no. I actually want to go there. I want to get into that. So I'm going to have something happen to you that's almost exactly like this other thing so that I can get to it. It's the only thing that'll bring it to the surface. And unfortunately, that's going to be a little bit painful for you. But when the pain's brought up to the surface, now we can actually sit in it together. And wow, like that's been healing and beautiful and painful all at the same time. But um, so I mean, this is kind of the crux of what Impact Center is all about. Like my full-time ministry is ministering to ministers. And it's crazy to me, like after several decades of doing ministry, I've never seen the landscape of stuff going on in the church as bad as it is right now. Like I'm just blown away.
Mostly with the
At,
morale. I mean, people just,
yeah.
it used to be fun being in ministry. It used to be fun working for, not really necessarily for the church, like, the institutional church, but just being in ministry in the Catholic Church. And now it's, it's just, there's a lot of challenges.
Well, the classic cliche, hurt people hurt people.
Mm.
And I just think there's a lot of human poverty today. There's a lot of lacking human formation.
A lot of spiritual formation.
Like we were talking earlier, like a lot of people are actually denying their humanity and trying to almost like navigate things in this very stoic way. And I don't know, like that just bleeds out sideways all over the place.
Mhm.
And when people have that kind of woundedness and brokenness in times of stress and times of trauma or difficulty, right? Like what's that line? Like crisis moments bring out the best in people and bring out the worst in people.
Mhm.
And I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of the worst of people
Mhm.
in bishops and in priests and in leaders that are, feel very, very out of control with the circumstances going on in the culture and the secular, advance of things, and even some of the declining institutional footprint. Like the church is diminishing in size and diminishing financial resources and diminishing in institutional presence. And the reaction to that is a lot of fear and grasping for control, which just comes out in ways that's very hurtful sometimes to people. Right.
What we call it the culture of scarcity, which is everywhere, not just in the church, right? And this culture of scarcity, that's what it stirs up, all this fear and grasping and self-reliance, self-protection. And that's just not, again, you have to know these things. You have to be, we are renewed by we're transformed by the renewal of our mind. So you have to know the truth, you have to know what that the truth sets you free, and to truly rely on the Lord and trust in him. This is his ministry. Anything we do for him is his. And no matter what happens, that is not, it's going to be hurtful. It's going to be painful at times. And there's going to be stuff you got to work through, but that is not going to stop us from preaching the gospel always.
So you mentioned Impact Center. Let's kind of wrap things up with tell people how they can get to know your ministry, and especially those who are doing ministry who have struggled. Obviously, this has been our passion too, ministering to ministers, because there are so many they don't have anyone to talk to, and it's so messy out there. So I'm so grateful for what you're doing. Tell people about what you're up to. I know you have a Kickstarter campaign, at least at the filming of this, and you're trying to get people involved. So give your info if you don't mind.
Yeah, we're at impactcenter.com is our website. So information there about the ministry. We're growing right now, so it's been kind of an interesting time. Like I have, 4 or 5 other people that are looking at coming on board as missionaries with Impact Center. So it's kind of an exciting time. We did just launch this campaign in the past week or so. A priest that's just been a beautiful presence in our life, a real spiritual father to me, but beautiful support of our marriage. He's the pastor that I worked for years when I was in youth ministry at St. Francis Cabrini in Littleton, Monsignor Ken Leone. But he's kind of coming into the end years of his life. He's in his early 80s, and but he really is a saintly man, just a beautiful priest and a very saintly presence. And we're trying to do a film project about the priesthood and the life of Monsignor Ken Leone. I think the film might be called Kenny. That's one of his kind of famous nicknames. Yeah, so we like that information's on my Facebook page and the Impact Center social media stuff.
I call him best boss ever. So this is, we worked for him. That's how we got to Colorado. And Father Ken is he's just a very unique priest. Obviously, he's very holy, very prayerful, but he just has a lot of natural gifts around managing people and
caring for them
caring for them and then managing them and getting the most out of them. He's just so affirming, so positive. It doesn't mean he won't address things when they need to be addressed. But his just overall MO is prayer, being led by the Holy Spirit and caring for his employees. And so I call him best boss ever. And the film too is about, if you're wondering, like, how does this going to minister to ministers? Well, this is going to be primarily, this movie, obviously, to encourage other priests to not give up. Why has Father Ken been so not just successful in the world's eyes or in the church's eyes, but he has been very fruitful. And it is all about his just his faith life and his prayer life and how he just kind of how he operates. So we want this to be encouraging to priests, but also to lay people. He has some things to say to lay people who work for the church. And so hopefully this will just be an inspiring movie about faith and the priesthood, and for all of us, lay people and working for the church, and lay people not working for the church.
Great. All right. So impactcenter.com. I know, Jim, you have a number of books out there, so people can find all the information on your website, on your social media platforms, Facebook. I want to thank you guys. Lord willing, we'll be able to have you all again, and we can kind of dive into some deeper topics. You've been such a blessing, and we're thankful for you. And hopefully one day, face to face,
Likewise.
we'll hang out. All right. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you.
Please. We're going to, how do we stop the recording?